Welcome back. We're on episode 7 now. Thank you all for listening to the Super Bowl reaction. Now it's time to learn a little bit about or reflect on what we learned from 2023. There were a lot of narratives, a lot of players. Today, we're going to focus primarily on rookies, just because that's who we are. We're sickos and we love rookies. But we're also going to focus a little bit on some teams who we found interesting or concerning, either way, people who had big narratives coming into the season. So let's take it away. Josh, bat lead off.
I think that if we're gonna talk about rookies, I think the first place we should start is with the first overall pick from last year's draft, Bryce Young.
Yeah.
Um, Now I think some people will say, horrible bad, not some. Everyone would say horrible bad situation, no receivers, which is fair. He was throwing to the ghost of Adam Thielen, and one of the worst wide receivers this year, Jonathan Mingo, and now with all that said. I still think Bryce Young was a lot worse. I don't think he elevated that at all, at all. If you have a good quarterback, they'll at least elevate it at least a little bit. He had huge problems like pretty much in every area of his game, honestly, compared to what he was doing at Alabama. I'm interested to see what happens with Dave Canales as head coach, not offensive coordinator, like it was for Baker, because he revived Baker, he revived Geno, Geno was just as bad as Bryce Young was, but for like his whole career. And
Right.
anyway, what did you think of Bryce Young?
I mean, something I think we do need to focus on when we're talking about Bryce Young is that he was my first overall pick. I'm not going to pretend he wasn't. Um,
It's not like it
but
was
he,
only you though.
right, obviously, like he was a consensus number one overall pick. People who said they wanted CJ Stroud are lying
Yeah,
or didn't understand the film that was present.
yeah,
Like on film, Bryce Young was number one, but he wasn't the typical slam dunk number one that we're kind of used to seeing, where it's like the Caleb Williams and then the rest, or the Trevor Lawrence, then the rest, the Joe Burrow, then the rest. There wasn't that same sense of this is a lock NFL ready guy. And one of the biggest things that I saw in the media that kind of concerned me was that everyone was praising his pocket presence. And something that I noticed in a couple other people that I watched on YouTube doing breakdowns independently, I noticed was that he actually was pretty poor in pocket presence, in that, yes, he could navigate a pocket well, but he often over navigated the pocket. He would start to fade away from the pocket, run out of it before it was really necessary. He wasn't staying in the pocket. And part of that is because he's short. He can't see over offensive linemen as well. And so for him, it is more natural to be outside of that pocket. But in the NFL, that's not a sustainable practice. And that showed immediately. He's one of the worst qualified passers or unqualified passers against pressure. Like I know PFF doesn't like him. He's 73 out of 78 with a 27.6 passing grade against pressure, which
yeah,
obviously PFF isn't perfect, but getting a 27 grade in anything means you're bad. And I think a lot of people expected him to do more, to do like a Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence type of skill set to where you can just throw him in, he'll work. And that's not how it goes. Like he's a smaller guy. His arm strength isn't as strong as those guys. He had pocket issues that really any NFL team should have noticed and taken note of and invest in the offensive line for. But instead, he's behind one of the worst offensive lines in the entire NFL. So he's constantly under pressure. It's just not a very good scenario for him in any way. Obviously, the skill players weren't great either. The run game kind of found some semblance for just a tiny bit, which was weird. Chuba Hubbard out of
yeah. He
nowhere
he
just
actually
keeps
had a
being productive.
pretty solid season. Miles Sanders sucked.
Right. He took Miles Sanders' spot, which credit to the Eagles for making him look good, I guess. But I mean, Bryce Young kind of got screwed over by his team on so many levels because they even ignored his actual problems, didn't develop on them, and didn't build into his strengths and avoid his weaknesses. They just kind of
Yeah,
threw him into a basic NFL offense, said run it, and didn't give him the weapons to run it with either.
yeah. He wasn't even like obviously he was horrible under pressure. Like you said, I mean, I don't need to read off his grades and stats. Like it was bad, but also even not under pressure, kept clean, only like 73 pass grade. You'd kind of hope for more for a quarterback like Bryce Young, who probably is more of a pocket passer than he is, um, a scrambler or someone who makes things happen on the run. Um, I just felt like it was a lot more underwhelming than even the situation warranted. That was kind of my takeaway for it. I'm interested to see because like obviously you can't prove it, but like I'm not necessarily a believer in like sitting for a year mattering. I feel like it's overblown for some people. I think that like certain quarterbacks would have been good regardless. Um, and there's quarterbacks who haven't sit and have done well. Like Josh Allen didn't sit, he did well, but then there's some that like did need sitting. Um, and the main reason you kind of bring up is like not losing confidence, not getting thrown into a bad situation. And Bryce Young feels like a quarterback who legitimately might have been broken because of what he went under this year.
Yeah. But unfortunately, you invested so much in him that
You're
you're stuck
stuck.
with him until that rookie contract's over.
Yeah, you physically can't do anything, and you got six. You literally have like 100 total fans at your stadium
Yeah.
last year. Some games like it was rough. I really want him to do well. I liked Bryce Young last year too. I thought he was the best quarterback last year coming out. But obviously in retrospect, like pretty much any of the other like top four quarterbacks, I think you'd say had a better season. You could argue Will Levis um was kind of in that tier, I guess you'd say. But I feel like Will Levis was even slightly a little bit better than Bryce Young.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of Bryce Young's strengths came through his accuracy and his anticipation. And those things were lacking in the NFL. And
Yeah.
that's not to be completely unexpected. Like, it's a tough transition. He wasn't in a great situation, so that doesn't help either. But everything that he's good at executionally was poor. And the tools aren't necessarily there to make up for it, like a Justin Herbert could do, where I'm still not completely sold on his reads. That's a completely different story. But his anticipation and his reading, even if it's not perfect, he has the arm strength and the ability to just land a pass out of a crazy arm angle in a good spot to where he can make up for a bad situation. Whereas it's impossible for Bryce Young to. He doesn't have the arm. He has to rely on a very wild throwing motion to be accurate. Like, there are some form issues that could be long term that people were willing to ignore because he was doing it in college and doing it extremely well. But in the NFL, it's a completely different story. It's a completely different game. It moves faster. And I do think he would have benefited from sitting, but you can't sit your number one overall pick like that.
No, you
Especially
don't.
not since they didn't have a real solution there. It was just Andy Dalton. Like,
Yeah, I mean, like Andy Dalton's the kind of player who like it gives Bryce Young maybe 4 games to sit before your entire like no one is showing up because they don't want to watch Andy Dalton. So then you risk that, but then now no one shows up because they don't want to watch Bryce Young.
right.
Um, yeah, I feel like let me give you some names, and I'm gonna ask you if you'd rather them, and I'll one of them we just brought up Will Levis, but also would you rather have Bryce Young or Sam Howell? Would you rather and like, I think you're taking into account what you did in college too. Like maybe I can turn this back around or rewind the clock. Would you rather have Sam Howell or Gardner Minshew? Or not Sam Howell, sorry. Obviously Sam Howell too, but Bryce Young or Gardner Minshew also. Be interested to see
I mean, the hard part
both
is
of those.
Gardner Minshew's not like elite, but he wins games. He
Let's say
knows how to
let's say
win.
you have let's say you have a middle of the road team that you're not going to be the first overall pick and you probably aren't going to the Super Bowl.
So you just are trying to win some games for your
Yeah, you're
fans.
trying to win some games. Yeah.
Man, I mean, Minshew's a better option unless you really believe in your quarterback development. And I mean, still, the fact that he lost all of his executional skills immediately in the NFL kind of worries me because he's not an Anthony Richardson. Where if Anthony Richardson came in and looked like a train wreck, I'd give him 5 years.
Yeah.
I'd say, hey man, you still have 4 more years to figure this out because you have every tool in the book.
I think also with
Even CJ
Richardson, you
Stroud.
can build a pretty solid efficiency wise offense just based on his running, kind of
Yeah.
like the Eagles did with Jalen Hurts, where like he doesn't need to be a really good passer for his first 2 years because he can run the ball pretty well.
Yeah.
And you can build a pretty good offense around that with a lot of misdirection and shorter passes and not really relying on him deep. Now, he's become a better deep ball passer, Jalen Hurts, but you don't really have that with Bryce Young. Like you have to rely on him to have a CJ Stroud kind, not necessarily that level of offensive rookie of the year standing, but you're expecting him to come in and do well, and he has to do well. Otherwise, you're just bad. You don't have a chance.
Yeah. Like you kind of need him to be Justin Herbert in his rookie year, where
Yeah.
he was great. Like nobody would ever complain about that. But it's not like he was CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud came into like MVP territory for a little bit,
Yeah.
to where like Herbert was just amazing and you knew he would eventually be an MVP caliber player.
Yeah.
That's what you were expecting. And that's unfortunately not the reality, especially not with the coaching decisions that the Panthers like, because the Panthers owner wants too much control. The Panthers GM isn't doing an amazing job filling up the roster. Panthers coaching, because they kind of have to be yes men for the owner, aren't
Yeah.
usually the
The
best
owner's
candidate.
really bad too.
That's
Dave
the biggest problem
Pepper,
in the
right?
organization. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Tyler, really quick before we finish on Bryce Young. Bryce Young or Will Levis? Let's say you're building a franchise, actually. Change the question.
I mean, I really don't like either, but
You have to choose. You have these are one of my would you rather.
given the NFL, I guess I'd take Will Levis just because Levis had a little bit
He showed
more
more.
show up.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
yes, he had a better team, but his arm strength is better. His size is not a problem.
Yeah.
Like if Bryce Young came in
All
and
those,
was a high
yeah.
efficiency passer, but just didn't work out, I wouldn't feel too bad about picking him. But he wasn't. Like you kind of need him, not necessarily to be Drew Brees, but have that same type of career where he understands he's not going to be the typical big guy who's going to be going in there, taking hits, all that. You kind of need to have a quick game around him. You need to be able to run the ball. And the modern NFL doesn't usually build for that. And I think Will Levis, you could rely on a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I mean, Drew Brees, the only reason that was such an amazing offense every single year, year in, year out, was because, you had a system that relied on running the ball and rhythm and all that. But when push came to shove, it was a Hall of Fame, potentially greatest quarterback of all time throwing the
Drew Brees
ball.
was good.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
you've got a guy who is a top quarterback ever. Like you can't tell the story of football without telling a little bit of Drew Brees' story.
Yeah.
So you kind of like you could be confident that if it came down to a last fourth quarter drive, you had the quarterback to still win. I don't know if Bryce Young would be able to do that, but that's the offense you kind of need to build around him to see if he has that in him. See if he's that in him, he'll still be a productive quarterback for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But it's a
That's fair.
completely different identity for the Panthers. And I don't know if they're willing to invest in that because
Yeah.
it is in the end the owner's game.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Tyler. Second last one. Bryce Young, you don't have to go too in depth. You can just, if you want to, I don't care, but
All right.
don't feel pressured. Bryce Young or Sam Howell?
Sam Howell.
Yeah, okay. That's
He
fair. I
he
think
was
Sam Howell was a
bad.
better passer.
Yeah, he was bad, but he showed the raw potential to pass. Now, can you refine it? Only time can tell. Like those pressure struggles are unsustainable as a successful offense, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But if you build a line around both of them, who do I have more confidence in? Probably the guy who's one of the better deep passers in the league, despite not being a good quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
But
And I think for the last one, you already said Gardner. Well, that was if you're trying to win. I think I'd rather have Gardner in general, even if it was just for 1 year. And like, because Gardner hasn't shown the ability to prevent a team from getting the first overall pick in the Jaguars. And he was good last year, but I think that was also a lot of
well, they
coach.
also had to sit him to make sure that. Remember, Mike Glennon ended up taking his spot
Yeah.
because they were like, "You're
Yeah.
playing too well. Hang on, like
That's
we
true.
need
That's
Trevor
true. And he,
Lawrence."
he did get injured that year, but I think I'd take Gardner too. Pro Bowl quarterback. Like, what am I even talking about here? Um anyway,
All right,
moving
we
on to
can move
Will.
on from him.
Yeah. I guess we talked a little bit about Will Levis, but do you have anything more to say about Will Levis?
No, I mean, you did bring up a little bit more that comparison between Will Levis and Sam Howell, and it's actually a really good comparison to look
Yeah.
into because while Sam
Yeah.
Howell had a bigger sample size by a lot, it was only 9 games to, I believe, all 17 were started by Sam Howell.
I think he missed a couple, or like I think he started a lot of them, but Brissett would play significant. Yeah,
Brissett
you're
ended
right.
up playing some decent snaps in
He
like the
played
last
at
three,
least
four
14
games.
games worth of snaps, at least.
Yes.
You
And
know,
he had
15.
last year as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So he does have enough to essentially be a full season's worth of production. Will Levis only had the 9 games.
That's true.
But I mean, depending on which stat you look at, they're comparable.
I think you could go either way.
Yeah, they both struggle against pressure. They both can create pressure. In my opinion, I'm still going Sam Howell because I've liked him since the draft for his ability to be a, I mean, one of one deep passer. Like if you can get him confident in his ability to produce in the intermediate game, I think he really could be the number one deep passer in the league. The only problem is that's a big step and a big if.
Yeah,
If you can get him to produce at a normal quarterback level, you've got the best deep passer in the league.
yeah.
And that's why I would take him because I don't know if Will Levis can do that. But I also don't know if Sam Howell could ever make that jump to just be a good quarterback.
That's fair. That's fair. I think I'd take Levis partially because of the sample size, like you said, it's smaller. I feel like there's kind of more unknown, and that does mean
Hmm.
more variance, but kind of tapping into that variance. But also I feel like I like Will Levis's intangibles. I don't think he showed to be horrible
No,
to the
certainly
level
not.
that, Bryce Young was. And I think you could coach that up, but you can do that too with Sam Howell. But I'm just really worried about the amount of sacks Howell takes. It's and Will Levis is playing hero ball, and it doesn't look pretty either, but um it's like lesser of two evils at this point.
Right. They're just comparable guys where will we see either of them this season? I mean, both teams will say hopefully not.
Yeah.
But if we do, exciting. I like seeing those types of guys get shots. We can move on to a non-quarterback, non-issue. Christian Gonzalez. Let's talk about a guy who was good. I mean, 209 defensive snaps. Unfortunately, he was cut short by that torn ACL, but when he was on the field, he was one of the best corners in the entire NFL.
Yeah. It was definitely a smaller sample size, but
I mean, yeah,
he played really well. And it's not like 5 games for, I don't remember exactly how many games he played, but it's not like nothing though. It's not like 2 games worth. Like you have it's a quarter of a season. Um and obviously they're kind of changing. I don't know how much they're changing systems. I mean, they're just kind of hiring from within. But it is a new coach, so we'll see how the defense is affected. But I felt like Gonzalez looked good, and he kind of lived up to like that athletic kind of toolsy kind of cornerback that you expected out of him, at least.
yeah.
The
I
cornerback class
mean,
this year, I'll say there's some hits in there, and I feel like Gonzalez was so far. I'd say you'd consider him a hit. I mean, he got injured, but he's also like in his second year now, about to start his second year, and he still has so much of his career yet left. And he looks good.
yeah,
That
yeah.
said,
I mean,
yeah,
Christian Gonzalez was amazing. And I don't think that was just a small sample size thing. We
yeah,
knew he was going to be good. Then he went to the DB factory and became elite. Like
mm-hmm.
you send pretty much any of those first round corners there, I'd have confidence that they would become all pros. The thing is, I think Gonzalez versus some of the other guys was already just a good corner. So yes, you brought him into a place where he's going to be even better. But I think he can move schemes, especially if it does change a little bit in New England and still be good. Whereas, Bill Belichick has done an amazing job developing DBs, but will we see that in a post Belichick era? I don't know. So
Yeah,
Christian Gonzalez is kind of got to be in the future plans if you want to build up this team to compete within the next 5 to 7 years. You kind of
yeah,
have to lock him in
yeah,
because Christian Gonzalez is going to be how you build your team up.
yeah,
You can
yeah. I
rely
mean,
on him.
he's a good corner on a rookie contract.
Yeah.
That's great. Like, what more can you ask for?
Right. Cheap production.
Like that's like if you could get that level of war out of every pick,
Amazing.
I'll just guarantee that level of war, not even try to swing for more upside. I mean, that's pretty high upside.
Right.
That's as far as the variance could go. Yeah.
And I think part of that is you kind of have to talk about the elephant in the room and the fact that he got picked right after another corner was picked, another toolsy man corner. The only issue is he wasn't necessarily supposed to go higher than Christian Gonzalez, and he went to one of the worst defensive schemes this year in Washington with Emmanuel Forbes. And but and
Yeah,
Emmanuel Forbes wasn't great.
Forbes was just bad. Well, I mean, I know he's a corner, but 28 run defense grade.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not it. But I mean, a 50 coverage, yeah, 50 something coverage grade too. It's like corner is very much one of those positions where it's so hit or miss, and corner in general too in the NFL, it's like a receiver who they're pretty much the opposite of in the sense of like or offense versus defense. Receiver, you very much can kind of scheme them to only do their strengths, and we'll talk a little bit about that with the wide receiver class this year. But like corners, you can scheme toward their strengths, but like you're never going to be able to say you're not going to play against zone coverage, or you're not going to play zone coverage, or you're not going to play man. Like you kind of have to be able to do both things. You have to guard the pass. You have to play against play action. You have to play against, like, you're very much at the will of the offense, and because of that, it's just so much harder to. I think it's so much harder to hide someone not being good.
Yes, absolutely. And especially when you pick a guy who's volatile. Like I kind of told you a little bit, but it's like the reliever of the MLB for those of you who are familiar with baseball. Relievers can be elite one year and just bad the next. Like it's a constant volatile cycle of is this guy going to be good or not. Obviously, you have generational talents. You have guys who are just solid and are always going to be.
Yeah.
But especially if you put them in the wrong schematic situation, like someone like Tariq Woolen, who was one of the best corners in the NFL last year, has a mediocre year this year because he's being used too much in zone when he's an elite man corner. Like
Yeah.
he had some regression there, and Seattle didn't adjust for that. And part of that is that Emmanuel Forbes was being used a lot in zone, I believe, especially early on when he was really struggling. And part of it was because they kind of put him as the number one, even though he shouldn't have been. Kendall Fuller was actually good, and instead Kendall Fuller
Fuller
was
has been
covering the
good his
two.
like whole career.
I know.
Yeah.
He had like 1 year where I was like not convinced he was elite. Other than that, he's just been really, really good. He's going to be making more money this season. But
Yeah.
I mean, Washington definitely fumbled it away, and you kind of knew as soon as they picked him. And then you saw Gonzalez pick next. You're like, okay, well, that means Gonzalez is going to be an all pro and Forbes will be out of the NFL in 4 years. Just that's how it works with Washington. But especially since you see talent versus an illusion of a certain potential. They wanted him to be a Deron Bland type, a Trayvon Diggs type, and he's not that either. So unfortunately for Washington, they made a really bad pick, and it kind of shows the don't fall for the allure of, oh man, we have this great role projected for him. Because defense doesn't quite have the same roles necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And falling for the roles and like positional need too in the draft is not always like, it's not a good practice to be consistently doing too, because you're gonna choose players that are not worth you choosing at that pick. It sometimes that happens, like, and because of it, you're gonna draft objectively inferior players to players that you could have had. Like the Niners a couple years ago, I bring up the Niners, I'm a Niners fan, drafted Javon Kinlaw with the pick we traded DeForest Buckner for because that need was there, and that did not go well. And we
No, it
literally
did not at
traded
all.
back and could have had Tristan Wirfs, who had we had Tristan Wirfs, could have won the Super Bowl last year. This
Right.
like a couple weeks ago, had we had a right tackle the way as good as he is. So yeah, positional need, like sometimes it happens, but that too is just like drafting for like your scheme, or your, obviously you need to draft for your scheme, but also drafting for positional need is not always my favorite.
Yeah. And then we can talk a little bit more about some more interesting rookie stuff. First, I just want to shout out Ronnie Hickman. He's an undrafted free agent that ended up signing as a safety to Cleveland, and he's one of the best safeties in the NFL, potentially. He had a really good season. He was a key part of their defensive success, and I like when UDFAs are amazing. Keaton Mitchell was great, but he was always hurt. Ronnie Hickman was just straight up good. So,
And he's doing it at a position that brings, a, actually safety doesn't bring a significant amount of value, but compared to a running back, it brings significant. Like Justice Hill was doing pretty good things in Baltimore too. So
Yeah. I mean, it's also easy when you have three absolutely amazing corners in front of you in Cleveland, but I mean, being a good
doesn't
safety is being a good safety.
yeah, doesn't discount what he did.
Yeah. And now we can go on a little bit more to the narrative stuff because, that's what we do. We can start with just talking about those first round running backs. Jameer Gibbs and Bijan Robinson both had very interesting starts to their NFL career. Bijan Robinson was being used as almost a part time, like 1A, 1B situation with Tyler Algier to start off the season. I remember I didn't start him in fantasy and then he dropped like 25 and then I did and he didn't anymore because
He
I
didn't
realized,
do
oh, he's
that
pretty
ever
good.
again. Yeah.
Yeah. But Bijan definitely has more talent yet to be used, and that's an Arthur Smith problem. That's something that we'll probably talk about once we talk about the coaching carousel. But then you have Jameer Gibbs, who also was used weird. In the beginning of the season, he was really not getting touches, and then all of a sudden he became a goal line back for some reason. And then finally, they just started giving the ball in all situations because they're like, this guy's just one of the best players on the field. So let's give the ball to him. And all
Yeah.
of a sudden, they were working and making deep playoff runs.
Yeah. Um with Jameer Gibbs, I'll start on Jameer Gibbs. This is the same thing that happened like with ETN when he came out. It was like, wow, like this is such a good player. We're gonna put him in this slot running back role where like he's gonna do such cool things and we're gonna be so creative. And I think slot works well, moving him down to running back because it creates a positional mismatch. And they're faster, but when you put a running back out wide, they are never more efficient than a slot receiver. And there is almost no point to do it for a significant sample size. Like I think there's outliers, like McCaffrey can kind of do it. Juszczyk's a fullback, but he kind of goes out into like a slot tight end kind of role and he does well. And Gibbs can do that too, but I felt like when they stopped trying to give him like gadget stuff and they just made him a running back, he was just so much better.
Yeah.
Surprising, you make the running back a running back, he plays well. But I feel like that's a lesson that I don't think the NFL is going to learn, but like let's just use our guys at their positions for especially running backs like for a reason.
Yeah. And we talked about falling in love with the role before you fell in love with the player. I think the Lions looked at it and went, hey, man, whichever one we end up with, Gibbs or Bijan before the draft, they were like, hey, both of them can play this mystery role that we want to play with them, where they're this hybrid. Because they already have like Amon-Ra St. Brown is kind of like a hybrid guy where he's playing in that classic Rams wide receiver scheme where you're like, oh yeah, he's blocking, he's getting no dirty, but he's still an amazing slot guy. He's an amazing guy outside.
Yeah.
They try to just be a little bit too creative, and unfortunately, it did backfire in the very beginning. And Jameer Gibbs, I ended thinking of getting benched for a little bit. He had a real rough stint in there, where all of a sudden we were like, is he
Yeah.
even good? I almost traded him in fantasy, which I was in a deep, dark place in fantasy at that point.
You
It
actually
wasn't a
had a
good
good
idea.
team, but it
I had way too many leagues to control. So
that's fair, yeah. Um But Bijan, I felt like was underwhelming this year, but I also feel like part of that too was his usage and the way Arthur Smith was choosing to use Tyler Algier and Jonnu Smith out of the backfield. that wasn't significant the amount of use Jonnu Smith, but like there was a point in the season pretty deep in where I think Bijan had like less than 5 carries inside of the 5, and it was like obviously you don't that's not the only reason you bring Bijan in, but it's like what are we doing? What are we doing?
you drafted a first round running back, let him get a
Yeah,
rushing touchdown.
yeah, and but with Gibbs, I think something interesting that I kind of was seeing on Twitter at least and read in different areas was like, oh wow, like the Lions made this, they totally like made a good choice. Like this is why you draft running backs. Like they can do great things. And I'm not discounting that a running back isn't necessarily valuable on a year-to-year basis. But I really don't think that's fair to say after a year because the whole argument of like don't draft a running back in the first round is about like Jameer Gibbs is going to be like and Bijan are going to be like the top 2 paid running backs or like top 5 at their position on rookies. You don't get that value of that rookie contract, and it kind of screws you over, and you don't feel it right away. But like I guarantee you, the Lions are going to feel it in 3 years when Jameer Gibbs is in his 4th year, and And, he's
Yeah,
making, what's his contract? I don't know his exact contract.
not too familiar myself, but
Anyway,
like team building wise, obviously we can harp on that forever, but they're in a window where they can kind of do whatever they want. Like Dan Campbell plays football a different way, and I'm going to let him cook until it doesn't work. And right now it's worked. They turned around very quickly from very bad to very good. But this is where it gets real. And that Campbell system of everything that goes on with this team is going to be put to the test because now it's okay. We made it to the NFC Championship game. You have to make a Super Bowl quickly. But also, fans can be like, hang on. Why are we drafting running backs in the first round and linebackers in the first round? And then we're not making the playoffs. Like, we kind of need to invest in the team in a more traditional way starting now. And luckily, they've been able to do that so long that, their offensive line is strong, their defense is pretty strong. Like, but now is the time that you invest and you seriously get those guys that are going to be crucial difference makers, not only in terms of money, but in terms of performance. So you
yeah,
can actually take advantage of this window that you created for yourself because it's a very good window.
yeah.
The Packers are upcoming at the same time, but if I had to pick one right now to win the division, you're
The
picking the
Lions had the better
Lions.
team. Yeah.
Yeah, like the Packers always pull out magic, and they'll probably have an amazing draft and draft the best defense known to man. But right now, they're still very set to be a playoff team. Their window is wide open. The NFC's fairly weak. It's definitely the time for them to push. They made an amazing timing, but I do think it is time for that Campbell system to be tested, and we're going to see a lot based off how they approach free agency and the draft. Because if they address it in a very Dan Campbell way, or if they address it in a classic football way, that's going to establish how this whole dynasty is going to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you have some significant contracts coming up. I know Goff is coming up soon. Amon Ra he's in his fourth year, I'm pretty sure, this year. Um, is he in his
Wow,
third
are
year
we
this year?
old? Holy cow!
No, yeah, yeah.
He's a
Amon Ra
2021 guy, so it should only be his third.
this last year was his third because 2 years ago was his second. Yeah, so this is his fourth upcoming year, which is this is his last year of his rookie contract. You can fact check that for me while I talk. Also Panay Sewell, I'm pretty sure is in his because Jamar Chase is up for extension. No.
This year will be his
Jamar Chase
fourth
is
year.
two. Yeah. So this year will be his fourth year. Panay Sewell is in his third year this year. So he's coming up too relatively soon. Those are two premium
They're the
positions.
same draft class.
Yeah.
Sewell and Amon Ra, so they should both be in their fourth year.
Are they actually?
Mm-hmm.
So,
They were both 2021.
so oh, never mind. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So they're both in their fourth year. So Sewell though has a fifth-year contract, so you have an extra year to deal
Yes.
with. But those are also premium positions that you're gonna have to spend money on. And Jared Goff, you're probably gonna have to extend more. So you're talking Amon Ra is probably gonna cost you over 20 million more than what he's currently making. Panay Sewell is probably gonna cost you over 20 million more than what he's making. And Jared Goff is probably gonna cost you, I don't know right now what they're
He's
paying.
the same, making like
It's
30.
probably similar. Like I think maybe 5 million more. So it's like 45 million more just in those three players. And you're not even increasing the talent. You're just keeping the same talent. Um, so but that could be said of any team. It'll just be interesting. I'm
Right.
interested to see how the Lions feel after in 3 years after giving, the contract to David Montgomery that they did, and then also giving it to and then also giving Jahmyr Gibbs first round draft capital. I look, he's only getting like 5 million ish for the next couple years, which is not like an insane amount, but it's
A lot for running back.
yeah, it's a lot for a running back that you could probably get similar production out of. Like I think Kendre Miller, you could probably get similar production out of him. He was like a third rounder. Not, I mean, he's definitely not as good. Don't get me wrong, not as good. Devon Achane, I think you could make an argument is similar, but
I
at
mean,
least for like, a fraction of that price, you might be able to re-sign like Jonah Jackson or someone like that who could really help you out, not just in the running game too, but also the passing game.
yeah. I mean, if you look at baseball right now, platooning is huge because you're essentially getting one really good player for the price of two cheap players. And if you're taking David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, you're taking them out of the equation and you instead take a couple later round running backs, two or three of them, and you have running back by committee, which they already kind of have because you have two really good, really highly paid
They're
running
already what
backs.
doing that right now. Yeah.
Right. But if you have two or three running backs that maybe they're a little bit more specialized, but you have the guys who can be extremely productive in the passing game. Then you have a guy who's extremely good at the running game and being a quick guy. And you have a guy who's just able to pound the rock and be a goal line back for you. And then obviously Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson are going to do an amazing job scheming that up to be okay. But you're probably going to pay them a grand total of 1.5 million versus you're paying 5 million just for Jameer Gibbs alone. Like we don't have to get into a bunch of team building stuff, but
Yeah.
if you're looking at already like a $4 million difference just between your one running back versus three, and then you're
Yeah.
doing that while your window for financial freedom is closing, obviously not a competitive window, but financially it's going to get tight soon. That's where these decisions start to hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see. I looked combined. If you combine Montgomery and Gibbs into one contract, because you kind of made the move for both of them in one off season. And you used them the same way you'd use like a McCaffrey. As far as like combined, they kind of play a similar role that McCaffrey plays by himself. It's like 12 million-ish for them combined for the next 3 years at least, or 2 years at least, including last year, 3 years, because Montgomery was in contract. It's a lot of money to be tied up in the running back position now. If any team is going to do it, it's either them or the Ravens. I'd say are the only teams I'd say it's worth doing it. And you can make an argument
Well,
that
the
it's
Ravens are
worth.
going to sign Derrick Henry or something, and it's going to get ridiculous.
Yeah,
That's
but
terrifying, by the way.
yeah, and Henry was. I looked. I thought Henry was bad. He was so good this year. He was so good in that line. That Titans line was horrendous.
I mean, he led the league in yards after contact
Yeah,
over McCaffrey, who runs through people all the time.
yeah. Anyway, the that rookie running back debate still going to be a debate for years to come. We'll see. We'll see in the end what the outcome was. Moving on next to, I think I kind of brought this up for receiver. Like traditionally when you think of like alpha receivers, first round receivers, you think of like big
Drake
X
London.
receivers, and like almost every wide receiver who did well. Now, granted, the best rookie receiver this year was more of like an alpha type body, but this year, like you look at like Tank Dell had a really great year. Jaden Reed, Josh Downs, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers. Like you're looking at these kind of receivers who had like the best seasons. Obviously Puka too, but all of them are like sub two. I actually don't know if Jaden Reed is, but a lot of them, a lot of the other guys are like sub 200 kind of guys, sub 6 foot, and they're just playing really well, and kind of like what we were talking about with corners, like it's harder to scheme up a corner to look good, harder to, you can totally scheme up a receiver to look good, and I feel like offensive coordinators and head coaches who scheme up the offense have really evolved into being able to find roles. Even like Tutu Atwell was extremely productive this year, who like for 2 years was not very good, partially because of injuries, I think, but also like it was kind of hard to find him that role. And we've kind of entered into like, I'd say it's like a new age of receiver, at least in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, the rookie receiver class obviously has been amazing. You kind of notice the guys like Quentin Johnston even more now because the rookie receiver class had so many stars that it was like you weren't getting mediocre production from a lot of guys. You're getting really good production out of a lot of guys. Some
Yeah.
of the guys that you did miss on, especially with high draft capital, you do notice. Jackson Smith and Jigba almost got lucky that Quentin Johnston's horrible because now nobody's focusing on the fact that he didn't really live up to the hype, which there are two amazing receivers ahead of him.
And he
But
also broke his hand in the beginning of the season.
yeah, that
However,
does
if you
help.
do look at like, I was looking at like metrics for rookie receivers, and like if you like give him the benefit of the doubt of like an extra yard per route run, so like he was like 2 point or like 1 point something. If you give him like 2 point something, and like anyway, if you gave him a lot of grace based on that hand injury, there's still like zero receivers who have like been good, like based on their season that he had, even like, or like there were a couple of receivers, but like it was like You're talking like less than 5% hit rate at that point.
Yeah. But, you know, I think one of the big things and the things that we're really focusing on is the size impact, because we were talking about the big receivers versus the small receivers. Quinn Johnson didn't do much. Cedric Tillman didn't do much. Jonathan Mingo didn't do too much.
Yeah, I forgot to
But then
bring
you look
that
at
up.
the small guys and you have, even when you start at the most mediocre production that showed talent, it's Mario Douglas, 5'8", right? Jaden Reed, less than 6, I think he's 5'11". You've got, I mean, Zay Flowers. Jordan Addison is thin for sure. Um, Josh Downs, my guy. Like everybody is very small, very quick, very agile. That's something I think is even bigger, is that most of these receivers aren't just small, fast guys. They're not Wes Welker necessarily. Their agility is the key part. Their acceleration is the key part. And that's kind of the real shift of the NFL, because speed has been a developing process. But that agility, that ability to, if you get a screen pass, make anything happen, that seems to be what teams are really prioritizing, what NFL teams are actually succeeding with right now. And you can see it with guys like Zay Flowers. He shined as a wide receiver one because he's agile, he's quick, but he's still small. And, the NFL is starting to move toward that, which is very interesting, because it's such an interesting thing to look at, just to see, hey, like wide receivers might be really small right now, but they're still producing. And I think that's also going to bring back a big push for that big X receiver at some point. Because like you saw with, Marvin Mims and Sutton. What's Cortland Sutton? Cortland Sutton had an amazing season. I was harping on him over the offseason. I was really excited for him. And, Marvin Mims originally got some hype as a great deep receiver and a great little small guy for him. Same with Jerry Jeudy, he's thin too. But Cortland Sutton ended up being the most productive receiver out of them, and actually was really good
Yeah.
for most of the season, because he's a big body receiver playing a bunch of tiny guys. Like corners are getting smaller and quicker too. And all of a sudden, a big guy's very valuable. I wouldn't be surprised if the Atlanta Falcons end up getting with a good quarterback. Drake London and Kyle Pitts have an amazing season, depending on how they use Pitts schematically.
And they're
But
both
these
like
guys are
alpha
big.
X kind of bodies.
Yeah, they both play like true number one receivers. Kyle Pitts
Yeah.
as well. He's not really tight end. He's a
He
receiver.
plays, yeah, he's 6'5" receiver type build, and then London's like 6'3", I think.
Yeah, London's a big guy.
And they're both bigger as far as a receiver goes. I guess Pitts is, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, but I wouldn't be surprised to see the bigger receivers actually talent stand out soon. But right now, this is a big wave. And it's going to be interesting to see in this wide receiver class what we're doing, because receivers are becoming this weird in between of, are they big? Are they small? Are they a one? Are they not? Like, you don't have to look much further than my own team, Terry McLaurin. Like, when I think about, oh, our team really needs a wide receiver one, I wouldn't think of Terry McLaurin, but he plays like one, so I'm not going to be mad.
I'd say McLaurin's a wide receiver one.
Right. But when
Yeah.
I'm thinking I want a big guy's going to catch the ball, I'm not thinking of Terry McLaurin. Like
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
thin, he's kind of lanky. I don't know. But that's what's working right now. Garrett Wilson. I'm not going to think of a Garrett Wilson guy when I'm thinking of my number one wide receiver. But talent wise,
He
skill
is
wise, production wise,
good.
I want Garrett Wilson.
Yeah. He
All these
like,
guys are these weird fringes, and it's working.
yeah, it feels like coaches are no longer asking like, are you traditional? Can you, it's more like, can I put you into a role, and like, can I build a certain section of my offense around you and really make, and if I did that, how much production could I get out of you? It kind of feels like that. Um like I even brought up like Tutu having a good year, and and even like the bigger guys too. It's like Puka really filled into that kind of role where like he was just eating up zone coverage this year, destroying it, and like he kind of filled like a role that like a Cooper Cup kind of role. He was getting a bunch of schemed up targets in the areas where, I mean, he was beating a lot of people too, but he was incredible against zone coverage, and versus like guys that just, if you're just not even able to do one thing pretty well, like Quentin Johnson came out, like pretty much the only thing he was good at is like after the catch. And he was not good in the NFL after the catch. So it's like your one calling card. You're not good at that. Now you can't do anything. Or like Cedric Tillman, honestly, was just not very good this year either. Jonathan Mingo, not a good player this year either. It's like, can you meet that? Like, I don't even need you to do everything. Just like, can you do one thing really well, and I can use that.
Yeah, and I mean that's what the later rounds of the draft are for. For hey, you got this one tool we really like. Maybe you're a special teamer. Maybe you're a big guy for us. Whatever it is, run
Yeah,
stopping linebacker, nose tackle. The lower value positions or things that are just very schematic, but those rotational guys can be the reason why you win. And there aren't a lot of those right now that are doing as well as you would kind of hope almost.
yeah. Receiver does feel like kind of like that one position where I think it's really, really, really difficult, like a linebacker, to get a true like number one receiver kind of mold, like a CD Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. AJ Brown, like that kind of player really, really elevates not just an offense, but a quarterback's ability to produce too and develop as a quarterback. Just like linebacker is so hard to come by right now, like a true good linebacker. But on the flip side, I think that you can find so many like good receivers, not even with you don't even need first round draft capital. Um, like I think that has never been so easy to find as it is today.
Yeah, especially with schematics and how the game's going. But you're talking about these guys who elevate their quarterback. The small guys can do it too. We saw that with Tank Dell, right?
Yeah, that's
I
true.
mean,
Yeah,
they work hand in hand so well, but they also had Nico Collins as a big guy, right?
yeah.
And I mean,